if we need to, and make those updates. Um, there are still some visa delays abroad. Um, this is a bit of a holdover from the pandemic. It's generally getting better, but people could still be delayed. So they need to think carefully about traveling if they need a new visa or if they're coming. Also, scholars that are here and they're going to be out of the US for 30 days or more, they must request approval in IPEN with a notice of absence request. And that's for if it goes beyond 30 days, we may or may not approve that. It kind of depends on the situation, and we want to make sure that departments and PIs are aware that their folks are going to be out of the US. And the other thing is also you have to be very careful of people working remotely if they are paid by Penn, because that has all kinds of tax and payroll implications. It's kind of tangentially related to their immigration status, but this is more of a compliance issue for Penn. And payroll tax will not be happy with folks. We can't keep paying people if they're out of the US for really beyond 30 days and at any length of time. So when they're out of the US, that really should be for earned vacation time or to go to a conference, but it's not for extended periods of time to be working remotely. Whether that's a J-1 or H-1B, any of your scholars, any of us working remotely is not easily done, and that's a payroll tax issue. So, especially for our J-1s, because we have definite guidance from the U.S. Department of State that our J-1s must be present on campus at least 3 out of the 5 days of the week, because they are exchange visitors. They are not entering the US to work remotely. They're here to engage in their program of research and exchange in, face to face with the Americans and the community at Penn. Um, Folks can't really take leaves of absence. We've had folks take maternity leave. That's a possibility. But other than that, you need to be engaged in your J-1 program. There isn't really an option for a leave of absence. And also their J-1 research or activity is limited specifically to what's indicated on their DS 2019 form, like any additional things that they might do, occasional lectures, teaching a class at Penn, things like that. It all needs to be vetted by ISSS first. And there is risk of immigration violation. They can't go do some research at Drexel just because they want to and the PI tells them to. There are a lot of limitations on where their work location is and what they're engaged in. So any of those things you should really check with ISSS. And also any absence from the US, this is related to the out of country. And we want folks to report that out of country form in IPEN. The scholar themselves will do the e-form and keep us informed. Like FMLA, that's kind of related to maternity leave or illness. And that's possible, but it's very rare. And when someone is here as a J-1, they need to be continuing performing their J-1 exchange duties or being a postdoc. So they can't, we've had instances where folks are going to leave Penn and they're kind of coasting and they're not going to show up in the lab for the last 2 months of their time. That's really not allowed. They need to be fully engaged in their J-1 program up until the last day, whatever that is. We've certainly had cases of that where folks just go MIA from their lab, and that's also an immigration problem, not just a work problem. So make sure that your folks are showing up every day. So we sponsor these categories at Penn. There are many different types of J1s, but the main ones that we do here are research scholar, short-term scholar, and student intern. We do some professors. Professors are often here as a visiting professor to teach, and research scholars are our that's our main group. They're here to do research, can be anywhere from, I think it's 3 weeks up to 5 years. So that's your postdoc, general postdoc. Short-term scholars, it's 6 months, limited to 6 months only. Um, and okay, Irene's given me the breakdown here. Yeah. So the way we would distinguish a professor versus a research scholar is that if they're doing more research, make them a research scholar, but they could teach. If they're being a professor, they're doing more teaching, but maybe a little bit of research. So they can do both, but think of what the majority of their time will be spent when you're choosing these options. So they're up to 5 years. Okay, short-term scholar, 6 months and you're out. There's no way to extend it. This is good for folks, for example, who are coming in to do a short-term research project or maybe teach a class for 1 semester, or for spring and summer. They're going to come for 6 months, do their activity, and then leave the U.S. Can't be extended. But short-term scholars, it's an easy category, but you can't keep repeating it. So they come for 1 semester and they teach a class, and then they're so good you want them to come back the next semester and teach a class again. But no, that's repeating the same activity. They could come back the next year or 2 years in the future when you offer the class again, but repeating a short-term scholar is not a possibility for folks. So it's kind of a one and done kind of situation. Student interns are for someone who's a student in their country. They have to be enrolled in a degree program, bachelor's or higher in their country. And then they're going to come and do an internship of some type at Penn. And then they're going to return to their home institution to graduate. So we most often do these, I think, for undergraduates who may come to the US to do some research in a lab for the summer, and then they go back to their school in their country. So I think that's probably the most common thing. There is a fair amount of internship paperwork that goes with this, but we've found that it's a really quite a good program. It's really useful for undergraduate students to be able to come as student interns, and a lot of our PIs and our labs have used this. Irene, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we probably do what, 50 of these a year, 50, 60?
Yeah, I would say that's ballpark about correct.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a fair number. And sometimes they come in groups from a specific university. You'll have 4 or 5 students that come to visit a lab for a semester. But it's a great option. And it's pretty.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
no,
just wanted to add also, it's not to be like a little clerical help in the department or the lab or whatever. They really have to be participating in an educational exchange program. So they're really learning something about the activity for which they're being sponsored for.
Right. Right. Okay. So the big thing about J1s is that these folks are, it really needs to be academic exchange. So they cannot be trying to take the place of a staff position. Obviously they can't be a tenure track faculty. They can't be a staff member. Like most of us on this call, we are all Penn staff of some type, some administrative staff position. So, and even if it's a science research position, you can't use a J1 for a research specialist, A, B, C, D, biostatistician, any of those Penn staff jobs, that's not for a J1. Okay, that's not what they're here for. It's a temporary situation, such as a postdoc. You're going to do 3 years of postdoc and then you're going to leave, or you're going to move on to a different job. So, also no clinical activities or training at School of Medicine, dental, nursing, vet. We even talk about clinical with our animal patients as well, not just human patients, but animal patients. Same thing. Um, Indirect or incidental patient care is something that they might be there with an attending physician or something to collect data, but they're not actually treating patients. Even if though they may be a doctor in their country, they probably don't have the Pennsylvania license, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really something we really want our departments, especially any of these in these medical schools, right? Dental, vet, school of medicine. You really got to be clear with your J1s that they are not clinical. They are research. Um, so things that you want to consider when you're thinking about sponsoring somebody is that we might need to consider their past immigration history if they have any. Um, they've got to at least have a bachelor's degree, unless they're a student intern, because hence they're a student. But any kind of research scholar, professor, obviously got to have at least a bachelor's. They've got to have adequate financial support, either from Penn or maybe from their home institution or government funding. They got to have health insurance coverage, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Um, they need to adhere to their program objective, which might be conduct research in the field of biochemistry. So that's what they're doing. And that's it. You can't farm them out to other departments. Okay. Maybe chemistry versus biochemistry. That's pretty close, but not, well, he also does physics. So we're going to send him like, no, needs to be the field that's written on their DS 2019. And they need to be in J1 status, like make an entry to the US as a J1 before they can start the activity, whatever it is, before they can start with us. So here's the funding. It's still pretty low. Um, I don't know. I'm assuming this will hopefully go up next year, but this is what we've got for this year. And postdocs must follow the Penn stipend levels, but not everybody who's a J1 is a postdoc. And if you're unsure about stipend levels or pay levels, you want to check with maybe BPP or Vice Provost for Research on funding levels. English language requirements. All of their interactions here, hence the cultural exchange part, they must have English language proficiency to be able to conduct, to be able to interact with the locals here in Philly and our other staff members and researchers at Penn. And we have a system to kind of vet this and verify it. I will give you an example from this winter of someone who, I won't name the country or the department, but they were actually flagged by Customs and Border Protection because their English was so poor that they didn't understand the CBP officers when they entered the US. So this person was held up. Their English language ability was questioned by Customs. They did let the person enter the US, but it was after I talked to the customs officer and said, yeah, he's our guy, but I haven't met him yet, so I don't know how good his English is. But and we ended up having to send this person home. They were a postdoc. They had used the English language interview evaluation form, option 3. but the folks in the department that had interviewed them and vouched for them were all speakers of the same language. And they said, "Oh yeah, he's fine. His English is great." It was not. We had him retested by Penn ELP. It was truly a unbiased objective test, and he failed miserably. So we ended up canceling his postdoc and we sent him home. So this is a real thing, and I really want to impress upon departments to be conscious of this, um, especially when using the option that the PI just kind of vouches for this person and says, "Oh yeah, his English is good." That is sort of an outlet, but we would much prefer the objective test to really vet them carefully. And of course, most of our folks can pass it, but this was a pretty egregious example. And we did, in agreement with the postdoc office and the PI and ISSS and Customs and Border Protection, we ended up sending this guy home, which was too bad for him. He's a great scientist, but his language levels were too low. Um, Health insurance requirements. Um, Everybody, as we know, everybody has to have it. Insurance is quite a mystery, even to those of us that, you know, have our US insurance all the time. So it's even more of a mystery to our international visitors. But postdocs by federal regulation must have these coverage levels. And we've kind of outsourced our insurance coverage and our vetting of the insurance to Gallagher. They're the folks that handle our postdoc insurance, but they will also help verify uh, scholars outside insurance that may not even be with the postdocs. It may not be
Jeremy,
the postdoc plan.
can I interject?
Sure.
Because now the postdoc plan is actually handled by the university.
Ah,
So it's really, and there's a typo. I apologize for the last dark blue box. It says purchase options that meet the regulatory requirements are available via Gallagher for visiting scholars and postdocs. It's no longer for postdocs. So postdocs have the separate plan through the university that they can sign up for. That plan does meet the J-1 federal guidelines for health insurance coverage. But for all other visiting students, visiting scholars, student interns, they have to have some sort of insurance coverage that meets the J-1 regulatory requirements. The Gallagher plan, if they purchase that, that will meet the required levels of insurance coverage. If they have their own insurance that they're bringing from home, they still have to log into the Gallagher portal to show their alternate insurance. Gallagher will then vet it to make sure it does meet the levels required for the J-1 program. So whether they have their own insurance or not, they either have to purchase it or they have to show the alternative insurance. So
and we're letting Gallagher as the insurance experts vet this for us because we're not insurance experts. Um, but unfortunately, we have had postdocs or visiting scholars get severely ill or injured in the US, and they needed that high quality insurance to cover them as they ran up thousands and thousands of dollars in medical bills. We have someone right now, they're not a J-1, but they are a Penn postdoc that is this person unfortunately was hit by a car here in Philly, and they've been in intensive care at Jefferson for weeks. And I can't imagine how many bills that's running up, but it's very unfortunate. This young man is very severely injured, and he is a Penn postdoc. Um, and we're honestly hoping that he survives this because he's been very severely injured.
another example of an insurance issue is I've been having email communication with a J-1 scholar who came in with his own insurance coverage. It was vetted through Gallagher saying it met the requirements, but I guess there's a medical issue going on right now and he wants to know how to use that insurance. That's something they need to, have a plan for. If they're coming in on their own insurance coverage that they're, is going to be vetted through Gallagher and meets Gallagher requirements, they really need to know and you might want to communicate this to them. How does their insurance work in the United States? So just to not wait until there's an emergency when they need it, but really do due diligence to before they get here, just to vet through their home insurance how it would work in the United States.
Yeah, and it's a challenging issue that comes up a lot. So we do run reports, and we try to make sure that our all of our postdocs and all of our J1s have J1 insurance that's been either vetted or they've purchased the Gallagher plan, etc. And it's a constant kind of battle for us to try to help keep people keep in compliance, but it's for their own good. It's really for their own good because unfortunately, we've had these people get hit by cars. That seems to be the worst thing that happens to people is they get hit by cars in Philly. So I guess we all have to be careful walking around. But export control. Luckily, we have an excellent export control office here at Penn, and this is about any of our international scholars who might be exporting technology or commodities or things like that that may be detrimental to U.S. security. And we do a lot of research here at Penn on all kinds of topics, and there are some times that things are subject to export control. And we have a good office for this. We are not the experts, but we have folks on campus who are. So if you run across these export control issues, you can work with Jessie Buchanan in there, and she's super helpful. Um, and there have been Penn professors. This is something that they have to sign off on, but advise your PIs and your professors to take this seriously. I believe there were a couple Harvard faculty members that went to prison for this, for export control violations, uh, with saying, yeah, this was, their research was not under export control, and it was, and they falsified or didn't pay attention to the documents. And that I think that's a real case from Harvard. So tell your PIs to take it seriously because the government does. Um, Internal policies. The biggie is for most of us is School of Medicine's visiting scholar policy, and that's in a nutshell. That's that a visiting scholar could be a J1, but they can only be here for 1 year, and they need a home institution to return to. And this doesn't mean for postdocs. Postdocs have an appointment here. But if they're coming to be a visiting researcher or scholar at School of Medicine, they need to have an appointment at home that they're going to return to after they do their year at Penn. This is only for School of Medicine, so it doesn't apply to vet or dental or nursing or SAS. Check with your various schools because in true Penn fashion, it's very decentralized. Everybody seems to have their own internal policy about how long people can be visiting for appointments and positions and things like that. ISSS is aware of it, and we will look for the sign off that they're meeting these things, but we don't control the policy. That's controlled by the individual schools. Let's see.
I think
Okay,
this is
I'm
where I
gonna.
take over.
Yep, I'm gonna pass this over to Irene, and I'll let her continue so you hear a different voice.
Thank you, Jeremy. So this, just for your edification, if you want to, save this, bookmark this website, because that kind of goes over kind of the soup and nuts of the application process. So that's vital that you want to make sure you have that bookmarked so you can refer to it. Has a lot of good information. So basically for J1 program, the documents that are required, there's a list of items that would be required for J1 sponsorship, but just make sure, anything that is in a foreign language has to be accompanied by an English translation. I had like a bank statement in German the other day that showed the personal funding of the J-1 scholar, but I don't read German. If we were ever audited, we can't be reliant upon, the DOS auditors knowing German. So that's why we want everything accompanied by an English translation. Make sure that one of the forms that's required is a department confirmation form. Just make sure, and that lists the dates of the sponsorship, and you just want to make sure all the dates are in alignment. So if you're requesting someone to come in on a J-1 from July 1, 2024 through June 30th, 2025, just make sure all the dates on the department confirmation form, the appointment letter, the IPEN record all match up. That will help us, be able to ensure a swift review. It's when there's, a July 1 start date on one form, a September 1 start date on another, the funding letters has another start date. Just make sure everything is in one easy, identifiable start and end date. Make sure that they have been signed. If there's a funding letter from the bank, just make sure there is a signature and it's on bank letterhead signed by the proper authority. Make sure the department confirmation form, the appointment letter, is fully signed. Again, this will help us with a swifter review process. Okay, so the item on the right is a sample of what the DS 2019 form looks like. And when you submit an application to IPEN, me and two of my colleagues are the ones that are predominantly looking at the J-1 applications. So we're going to make sure all the supporting documentation is there. We list a, 3-week processing time approximately. Make sure you try and get applications submitted as far in advance of the start date as possible, as soon as you have the materials that we can start reviewing. This will allow us more time, especially this time of year, we get very busy with the applications. But it also allows the scholar, when they go to apply for the visa at a U.S. consulate, the earlier you get the application in, the earlier we can review it, or the faster. And then that would allow them plenty of time to get the visa at the U.S. consulate, since visa processing times at U.S. consulates can vary. So now, as of last April 27th, we can now we can digitally sign the DS 2019 form, and we can email them to the scholar with a CC to the departmental representative. So that was a huge change that occurred last year. Thankfully, the Department of State finally enacted that. So it saves a lot of time in everyone's part. No more mailing or express mailing the DS 2019 forms. Included with the DS 2019 form, we send an email, and there are links to various important information for the J-1 scholar. It talks about next steps. Once they have the DS 2019 form, what do? They have to pay the CVIS fee. They have to schedule an appointment at the U.S. consulate. So it's really important that they read all the links that are in the email. It's the same email that you're getting. That really helps them inform themselves about not only the next steps they have to do, but also their responsibilities as a J-1 exchange visitor. Important regulatory things that they need to know in order to have a smooth and error-free opportunity here at Penn. Okay, so basically, once we issue the DS 2019 form, it's emailed to them electronically. The instructions that I just referred to, the scholar, and this is for first-time J-1 holders, right? This isn't for continuing. This is for first time to the United States in the J-1 status under Penn. So they do have to pay a $220 CVIS fee that is paid directly to DHS. And again, this link where they can pay this is in the information we provide to them. They schedule an appointment for a visa at a U.S. consulate. They are hopefully issued the visa, which is the document inside the passport, and the visa is what allows the entry to the United States. Okay, so they can enter 30 days prior to the start date that is listed on the DS 2019 form once they have that visa in their passport. As Jeremy had mentioned at the outset, if the person is not coming in on time as planned, it's very important that you notify us by submitting a late arrival e-form in IPEN so that we can adjust their DS 2019 dates, kind of knock them into the future so that their record is still alive, so to speak. If we don't, it becomes invalid. Their CVIS electronic record becomes invalid, and that's a problem. So just let us know of any delays or new start dates for an initial J-1. Okay, so upon arrival to the United States as a J-1, there is a virtual online application check-in process that the J-1 can do. This is regulatory. Again, we are responsible as a J-1 program sponsor to have orientations. I guess before the pandemic, I wasn't here, but at Penn, but there were in-office orientations, but now because of the pandemic, we do them virtually. So the J-1 Scholar, again, is sent all this information about how to log into IPEN, view the orientation, and also how to upload their documentation that they've received upon entry to the United States. And at that point, we can validate, it's called validating their CVIS record, thereby activating their CVIS record. And again, the CVIS record, it stands for Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. And this is a government database from which the DS 2019 form is issued, has all their biographic information, all their information about the activity they're undertaking in the United States at Penn, the location, what, their funding sources and amounts. So that's very important that they do that in a timely manner. And again, they're sent email reminders of what they need to do, when they need to do it, and how to do it. Okay, so if you're going to remember anything from today's presentation, it's very important that remember that if anything happens to the J-1 that precludes them from participating in the program for which they received sponsorship, it's very important that we as our office is notified of that because again, we have been designated by the Department of State to oversee Penn's J-1 program. So the regulations are very tight and clear about what we need to do. So if someone is not participating in their program, such as they're withdrawing from the program, resigning, being terminated, all that needs to be informed to our office. There is I recommend going into IPEN, and there is an edit form where you can indicate early departure due to resignation or what have you, and then that will be kicked to our office for review, and we can take it from there. As Jeremy mentioned, no overseas travel longer than 30 days in duration unless it's vetted through our office. And again, just to clarify, if they are going to be overseas for 30 days, there's got to be a bona fide business reason that talks to their ongoing J-1 activity while they're outside the United States. So they can't really take a leave of absence and go home for a couple months and then come back in. Otherwise, we have to end their J-1 program if they're no longer participating, whether they're here or outside the US. So again, if they are going to be, having to attend a conference, if they are consulting archives in another country, they're doing research at a particular lab in another country that necessitates their reason for being in that country, that's fine. That's something we could entertain. But again, notification has to be submitted in IPEN about that. Another regulatory requirement is that J-1s notify us of any changes in their U.S. Contact information, whether it be their residential address, their phone number, email, site of activity, all that information they can upload in their IPEN record for update. If a J-2, which is a dependent of a J-1, departs the program, is going back home permanently, again, there is a way that the J-1 can notify us of that in IPEN. So Last but not least, very important, any incident or allegation, as it's phrased by the Department of State, anything that can bring, and I quote this, notoriety or disrepute to the J-1 program. We all need to be here at ISS notified of that. And anything, if someone, again, is hospitalized, if there are any legal issues, things like that, notify us as soon as possible. Okay. Verification requirements, you as the BA will be getting notifications to confirm whether the person is here or not. Just please make sure you're doing that in a timely manner. Again, it is our responsibility to monitor the well-being of a J-1. So if we're not hearing that they're participating in the program as they should be, that's of concern to us. So just make sure that when you get those notifications that you take the necessary action. And this is required for H's as well, not just J1s. Okay, the 12 and 24-month bars. So I'm not going to really go into too much detail about this because it can get a little bit confusing. Suffice to say that if someone is coming into the United States as a J-1 research scholar or professor, those are the two categories that our office has ability to sponsor under, those two categories, then we have to take into consideration any previous J time, whether they were here previously as a J-1 scholar, research scholar, professor, whether they were here as a student intern. We have to look at the duration. So all this information is part of the application form that the J applicant submits. So in some cases, if they've been here in another J category or as a J-1 research scholar, it may preclude our ability to sponsor them for a certain period of time until they, have been out of that category for a bit. So again, I wouldn't worry about this too much other than the fact that if they've had prior J time, either at Penn or at another institution in the US, it could impact our ability to sponsor them for a little bit. So the 24-month bar is not to be confused with the 2-year home residency requirement, even though it's the same duration. The 2-year home residency requirement really only affects certain J1s, and regardless of category, this can happen to a J1 research scholar, J1 professor, J1 student intern, and basically what it means is if they are subject, if the Department of State deems they're subject based on the activity they're doing or based on the funding, where they're receiving the funding, whether it's from the home government or US government, they can be deemed to be subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. What does that mean? If you're subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, that means you are precluded from acquiring an H visa, K visa, L visa, or a US green card, or the ability to change your visa status within the United States until you've gone home for 2 years. Okay, so if you've got any J1s who are potentially thinking, oh, maybe I can get an H, that might not be the, smooth sailing if they're subject. There is a way to apply for a waiver of that obligation to go home for 2 years, but our office cannot advise on it just for the very reason that we as a J-1 program sponsor are supposed to be upholding the spirit and intent of the J-1 program, which is you come in, you do your activity, and then go home, right? It's all about fulfilling the exchange activity, and exchange is key. A J-1 can tell if they are subject by looking at the lower left-hand corner of their DS 2019 form. It will mark on what basis they are subject. If it's all blank, then they're not subject. Likewise, their visa, and this is an example of a visa, usually indicates whether they are subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. 212E is the section of law from the Immigration and Nationality Act that specifies and talks about the 2-year home residency requirement. Okay, so again, kind of confusing. You don't have to know, every single detail about it, but just we want you to be aware of, certain limitations within the J-1 program about them changing status or future sponsorship. I'm not going to go into this. I think I've killed it. Too much information. Sometimes it's too confusing.
And
Okay. So now,
Irene, let me say one more thing about the bars.
uh-huh.
That's really for department folks out there, it's really kind of an inside baseball kind of thing that you don't need to know in any detail, but just kind of know that there is such a thing as these 1 year, 2 year bar, 2 year home residency, and you can always work with ISSS to sort it out between your people and us. I mean, and even for those of us that deal with it all the time, some of these are head scratchers. Like Irene and I'll be like, wow, I'm not sure, this guy was here then, but we will figure it out. So don't feel like you need to be responsible for that, but just be aware that there is such a thing and that ISSS can help you with that, or your scholar, we can help with that.
Thanks, Jeremy. So, for J-1 extensions, so this is an extension of their DS 2019 form and therefore an extension of their sponsorship. Um, just make sure the application is submitted in IPEN well before the expiration date of the individual's end date on their DS 2019 form, because as it says, after that person has expired, we cannot extend the sponsorship any longer. And, just to follow up the visa that I had mentioned earlier, again, this is only what controls their ability to enter the United States as a J-1. What's more important while they're here in the United States is the DS 2019 form, that it has a future end date and they're participating in the program. You can be in the United States with an expired visa, but you shouldn't be in the United States with an expired DS 2019 form if you're allowed a 30-day grace period after your DS 2019 has expired to depart the US, but just wanted to clarify the difference between DS 2018 and visa. Okay, if you have any J1s who are going to be transferring their J1 program to another program, or they're at it as a J1 at another program, want to transfer to Penn, there has to be similarity in their activity. So if they're doing biochemistry at Drexel, then they have to be doing, and they're transferring to Penn, they have to continue in that endeavor, research in biochemistry. If they have been at Drexel for 1 year as a research scholar, then they've used up 1 year of their 5 years. So just keep that in mind as well. And there cannot be a gap between programs. So meaning if their program at Drexel ends April 30th and you want the contract at Penn to start June 1st, no can do. There can't be a gap between the end date and the start date for transfer cases. If someone is within Penn and they're going to be transferring from one department to another, that requires another e-form application in IPEN. So we have that updated information in our system and reflected on the DS 2019 form. But again, the same principle applies where they have to be participating in the same zip code, which is the activity code like biochemistry. They can't go from biochemistry to genetics. Okay, so just that's important to remember. Occasional lectures and consultations. I just did a flurry of them this morning. This is for kind of like a one-time activity where the example I have this morning is someone is in Jewish Judaic studies and is presenting a one-day seminar for like a couple hours in Westchester University and is getting paid an honorarium. That's fine. It's not until April. So he wisely the J1 scholar wisely put in the request now. So I was able to review it, could see that, it correlates to what he is doing here at Penn. Again, it's a one-day opportunity. And so I was able to approve it. So he now has a letter. His DS 2019 form has been updated to reflect that $500 honorarium payment from the Westchester University. Okay. And
And
again,
some of
we have,
those, I just want to throw out there some of those lectures and consultations. I mean, especially for some of our, I don't know, more famous or experienced researchers, that honorarium could be thousands of dollars. And the big thing is they've got to ask us before they go and do the lecture, because they can miss out on a lot of money. And I feel they get very angry with us, but we're like, no, sorry, you gotta we'll give you the permission. Pretty much all the it's not it's easy to do, but we've got to do it before you go do the lecture at, I don't know, they're going up to Princeton to give a talk, and they're going to get paid like $5,000 for some seminar they're doing, but they've got to get it beforehand. And I feel bad. I mean, I wish they could collect their nice fat honorarium check, but yeah, got to do it before. We've had some very angry scholars before.
Yeah.
So,
And the online orientation arrival information that I mentioned earlier, we kind of revamped it this past winter, so that really spells out clearly the responsibilities of a J-1 for a J-1 if they want to do this, to notify us in advance of things like this. So they are informed. If they're looking at the tutorial, as they should, they are informed. All right, anyone who is a spouse or an unmarried child under the age of 21 is eligible to come in as a J2. And their J2 status lasts as long as a J1 status lasts. So you can't be here independently as a J2 because you're in a dependent visa classification. Some things about the J2, they themselves can apply for employment authorization through USCIS. J1 doesn't need that, but a J2 doesn't require that in order to be employed. They themselves also have to have insurance coverage that meet the J1 federal regulations, those required levels. And they should be residing at the same US address as the J1. Okay, so they shouldn't be, if the J2 is employed, they shouldn't be working in Timbuktu in the United States. They need to be here residing at the same US address as the J1. And finally, I think this is the next to last slide. Once the J1 has completed their program, they're going back home. They're going to share with their fellow countrymen the skill set they learned while here and something about the American culture. They have a 30-day grace period after the end date of their program. Now, if their program end date on their DS 2019 is June 30th, they have 30 days from June 30th to depart the United States. If they are, we have not been informed, and their DS 2019 might go to June 30th, but they're resigning effective May 1st, that's their end date. Regardless of whether their DS 2018 has a June 30th, if they are no longer participating in the program, that's when their 30-day clock starts. Okay. And there is in IPEN notification where you can edit the J1 and you can indicate a new end date. That will tip us off, and we will shorten their DS 2019 form, send it to the J1, and just say, okay, you got 30 days from your new end date indicated on your DS 2019 form. Okay, and again, that last section in blue, consult our office, before there are any changes or plan changes or changing departments, changing positions, funding, just notify us in advance. There is that edit feature in IPEN where you can indicate the new end date or if they're getting additional funding. But if they're going to be teaching a class in another department, all that has to be vetted through our office first. Okay, so that kind of wraps it up. So feel free to, at this point, you can scan the QR code or the link there to give us feedback on today's presentation. But at this point, we can open it up for questions. I think one question I didn't have a chance to respond to was, how do you discern between using a J-1 research scholar or a J-1 student intern? And I would look, on our website. J-1 student intern is really, I think, and Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we created it or instigated or requested sponsorship for it from the Department of State specifically for students who are getting a bachelor's degree. They were in the process of getting a bachelor's degree, because for a J-1 research scholar, you have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree in the field for which you're coming to do your research in. J-1 student intern, not necessarily. You have to be enrolled in a degree seeking program, but you can still be within your bachelor's degree.
Yeah, because you're hence the student word in there. You're still a student, so you haven't graduated yet,
Mhm.
and you're able to come and have an exchange visitor program for a few
1 year,
months, up to yeah
1 year
up to
max,
yeah,
1 year
but
max.
usually they're for a semester or a summer. That tends to be what we see, um, and it's been super. I think it's been really successful because we opened it up maybe 10 years ago. I mean, I guess I'm dating myself, but I've been here. I was here before we had it, and we always used to struggle because they'd say, "Well, I want to bring this guy, he's a junior and in college in his country," and we're like, "Well, he can't come because he doesn't have a bachelor's." But then we put in this student intern, and departments and PIs are able to take advantage of it, and it's really, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Students
And
can come and it works very well.
in one of the questions that says, does the person need to be enrolled in a Penn program or courses? So for J-1 student intern, they have to be enrolled in a degree seeking program in their home country. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be enrolled in a classes at Penn, but they have to have a host department, obviously. So I'm not sure if that's what you meant by the
Yeah,
Penn program, but
yeah, and
yeah.
they would be a college student in their country, and then they would come here for some kind of like research experience. Um, yeah, and and then they would return to their country to go back to their classes at that point. Um, let me answer there was another question here about the waiver process.
I think,
Um,
is that okay? Yeah, go ahead,
I
Jeremy.
no, I was just going to say um, that we there is such a thing as a waiver of the 2-year home residency requirement. We cannot, as the sponsor, it's a conflict of interest for us to assist with it. But to give you just a general idea, the J1 holder has to request the waiver from their government. There's like 3 steps. They request it from their government, then it goes to the U.S. Department of State, and then it goes to USCIS, to immigration, that actually issues the waiver. And it often takes, say, between, I'd say, 4 to 9 months, 4 to 9 months, maybe,
If
for,
not longer.
if not longer, for that waiver process to happen. Because you got kind of 2 US government agencies and the person's home government that all have to agree that we're going to let the person out of it. And this usually affects our Chinese and Indian researchers, which we have a lot of. Um, they are usually able to get it, but it does take them several months to get it. So it is really on them to do that. We can't assist.
And the really important thing to remember about the waiver process is once the Department of State, which is kind of like the first layer of the review process of a waiver, once the Department of State comes back and recommends a waiver, we by regulation, our office is no longer able to extend someone's DS 2019 form beyond their current end date. So if you have someone coming in and they've got a 1 year DS 2019 form, let's say with a, April 30th, 2025 end date, and, they come in this spring and start the waiver process, if they get waiver recommendation as of, March of 2020, 5 that they've been recommended for a waiver, we cannot extend that DS 2019 form before after April 30th, 2025. That makes sense. So, I think a lot of people come in on the J-1 and they're clamoring for an H and they want to get a waiver, and they prematurely apply for a waiver. You have up to 5 years on a J-1 as a research scholar, but people want to get that, they're trying to get the waiver, but they're painting themselves into a corner because then what if you as a department or another school doesn't want to petition on behalf for an H visa? That's really their only opportunity at that point, because we can't extend their DS 2019 form. I'm actually going to unmute the philosophy department. So,
Hi,
there you go.
I'm Michelle Gaffney, Department Administrator in SAS Philosophy. I originally raised my hand just to clarify that, yes, that was what I meant for if the person needs to be enrolled in Penn courses in order to be part of that student intern program. But I also wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just sharing your screen and walking us through the ISSS website for like how to navigate to the information you referred to during the presentation, just to connect the dots for how to go find it myself later.
Okay, I have to give me a second while I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can bring up our website.
While Irene's doing that, I'll try to answer Christina's question about inviting someone who will be paid through Penn. I don't believe that these J-1 positions are necessarily posted on Workday. I honestly don't know, because ISSS does not have access to Workday in that way. So I don't know. But remember, J-1 positions are not staff jobs and they are not faculty jobs. So
I might know the answer to this.
okay. So yeah, go ahead if you know.
I believe that this goes through the offer letter process that appointments and postdocs and everyone else goes through, where you have to draft an offer letter, run it through Interfolio, get it approved by the dean's office. At least this is how it works in the School of Arts and Sciences. And then they'll send it back as an approved offer letter before you can send it to the person who's looking for this appointment or position. You'll get it signed, re-upload it, and then it sends it directly to the business office who creates and hires the person, I believe in Workday. So the administrator, who is the contact person for the visa, wouldn't create it in Workday, at least in the School of Arts and Sciences.
Yeah, but I really want to emphasize that, these folks are not, they're not staff. So and every school may have its own convoluted individual process as to how they do it.
They would be put into Workday as an affiliate or as a student. They wouldn't be in there designated as a staff person or an employee.
Right. And for us, I guess, for ISSS purposes, it begins when the department administrator, like yourselves, puts it into IPEN. That's when the person comes up on our radar. And prior to that, we don't know that they exist. So that's like our first input is that.
Okay, so it looks like Amy had indicated they put in Workday as an academic affiliate. Okay, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Amy.
All right, so you should be able to see the ISSS website now. And for information for the different J-1s, what you want to do is go to immigration and then scholars and departments. And then it just has a breakdown of the different visa classifications, right? So we have J-1 visiting scholars, J-1 student interns. So you just have to click on each one for further information. So this would be for the J-1 scholars, research scholars, or professors. And it kind of goes over everything that we have kind of spoken about today. J-1 student interns are here. So again, all the information about the J-1 student internship is here. So it starts by going under immigration and then scholars section. Okay. Yes, ISS is one of the, that was Jeremy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other, and then, oh, the other thing I wanted to show you was the forms and document library. This is helpful for yourselves and for the J1s. So we have the occasional lecture and consultation. All these have to be uploaded in an IPEN notification. The incident report is what I mentioned before when it was talking about, notoriety or disrepute, or someone's having legal issues or is in a hospital, things like that. That would be the incident report that would need to be provided. But this is definitely a listing of all the forms that we have in our library.
And the incident report, just for example, we had a J1 scholar, I believe he was from Wharton, who last summer, last fall, Irene,
Yeah.
he got
Yeah.
mugged on the L, and he was beaten up by some local Philly residents, and I guess they did not rob him, but they assaulted him on the train platform, and it was pretty bad. We really felt bad for the guy. But we did do an incident report to State Department. That's exactly the kind of thing that we need to report, and
Yeah.
they take it seriously. Or unfortunately, our example of the postdocs getting hit by cars. Like,
Yeah.
tell all your postdocs, be careful crossing the street. That's all I
Yeah.
can say. Like,
And it's, we're not reporting to the Department of State, and Department of State doesn't want to know out of like punitive reasons. It's like they're really concerned, right? Because they're overseeing the entire J1 program in the United States. So they just want to be aware of what's going on. And again, we are, as a J1 program sponsor, from a regulatory point of view, we are charged with monitoring the well-being of our J1s under our sponsorship. So again, it goes to due diligence, what we have to do on our end, as well as just being concerned for another human life. Okay. Any other questions? We're a little bit over time, but.
I forgot to mention in my part about this is a real world example. We've had Penn departments who shall remain nameless. They bring in a J1 person, and they get them on payroll as a visiting scholar or a professor. And they come in for, 2, 3 weeks. They get them on payroll. They get them a social security number. They get them set up. They do whatever they're doing for the first month or the first 3 weeks of their time. And then they exit the US and they don't tell anybody. This was just a deal with the PI, and it's just kind of a handshake agreement, and they go back to their country for 6 months or something. But it's a way that Penn departments and PIs are using to get around hiring people remotely, which they usually can't do. Or they can, but it's very onerous. So they do a J1, but the person is not really present in the US, but they got them on Penn's payroll and they got them hired, right? That is not, we seem to uncover one of these folks every couple of months. And that is not how it's supposed to work at all. That is departments doing an end run around Penn policies on remote work. And the person isn't even in the US. They've gone back to Europe or whatever. And yeah, it's a problem. And this is not just an ISSS problem. This is like a payroll, HR, tax problem
And
for
as Jerry
your.
As
Yeah.
Jeremy had mentioned, we received clarification from the Department of State in the form of guidance, and they basically, that's where you have to be present on campus, on the Penn campus, 3 out of the 5 days per week, predominantly engaged in the program on campus. I mean, it kind of goes to the crux of the reason for the J-1 program. They want people here meeting Americans, imparting some of their culture to Americans, their knowledge to Americans, and vice versa. So you can't do that remotely. That defeats the purpose of the J-1 program. So the Department of State in the last few years has really started honing that requirement from J-1 programs. So this is why you're probably hearing from us about it more.
And this, of course, is all the outgrowth of the way the world is operating now, that because even prior to the pandemic and definitely throughout the pandemic, everybody can be remote, like wherever you've got a laptop in the world, like, yeah, I'm working. But immigration and HR and tax and compliance has not caught up to how the world is working these days. So it's uncovering all kinds of issues that kind of nobody ever thought of before, I think, until the past couple of years. I'm just putting this out there to inform you, to have you think about this, because it's not just an immigration issue. It's like all across Penn with employment, and even us. Like if I'm going to go, I want to go work remote from Florida for a month in the winter. Like the payroll folks are probably not. I might get away with it for a month, but beyond that, I'm not going to be able to do it because of the tax implications between Pennsylvania and Florida. Like I don't understand it, but we're just seeing more and more of these cases. So
Okay. Well, there's no further ado. I'm going to put my email in here, the chat box. If you have any burning questions that come about it regarding the J-1 program, you know, feel free to reach out and try and help you. And Jeremy, any last words of wisdom?
yeah, I mean, I see a lot of new names on this webinar. I see a few old friends on here too, but welcome everybody, and always feel free to reach out to us and ask us even questions that this is not, this is our main area. And for you folks, this might only be 10% of your job, that you have to work with J1s or H1s, but that's what we do all the time. So always reach out to ask questions beforehand. If you run into trouble, if you're just wondering about what to do with this person that Professor so-and-so wants to bring, we're happy to have a conversation even months beforehand. It can save us all a lot of trouble to have a discussion before you even put anything in IPEN. Like just, we'll set up a call, we can exchange an email, whatever, and we can help kind of guide it so it's easier for all of us.
Someone asked about the best way to reach out. Yeah, you can use the contact form on our website, or I just provided my email. Either one, whichever,
Or if you can find on the staff, ISSS staff page, there's you can find me, you can find Irene, you can find our colleagues.
Oh, sorry.
To oh yeah, I don't see it either. I mean,
I had it earmarked for someone else. Sorry.
Okay. To find us, and we do have sort of our portfolio that we work on, but we can always, I might, if you talk to me, I might say, oh, I can help you with that, or that's really a question for Irene, or it's a question for our colleague Donna Seinfeld, because she handles the O1s and the faculty, for example. We might refer you to another colleague, but we'll certainly point you to the right person anytime.
Okay. Well,
All right.
thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks for attending, everybody, and reach out anytime.
Bye.